welcome all of you for the 136th meeting of the Sri Lanka Literary Society. The Sri Lanka Literary Society was formed in 2009 by a group of enthusiasts, including myself, Ruan, Niroshi, Nirmala, and a few others. And as you can see from the timeline, we have progressed quite a lot from where we started up to now. I won't read what's written there, but you can see that we did various kinds of meetings. And I've given you in the chat box and also here the link to our website. Now, you can see that the types of presentation we had were quite varied. We had arts and culture, science and medicine, technology, social science, cosmology, and those are some of the topics that we spoke. And the last one we had was 2 weeks ago when Dr. Kavan Ratnathunga, who's an astronomer, the medical people know him better as the young brother of Chester Ratnathunga, professor. And that was our last one. And we have a wide range of topics, as you can see. Chula, you're in very good company. This is just a selection of people who have spoken to us.
Company. Yeah.
There's a huge collection of notable people, and this is possible through our connection in a network. I know somebody who knows somebody, and like that we should chat. For example, Roshan Mahanama is my cousin, and so I approach him, and when I approach him, he can't say no, you see, and so on. So Chula, this is just to show you an excellent company.
Yes, certainly.
And coming to today's talk, you know the title, Laughter, Lyricism, Humour and Poetry. And this is Chula Herath, a painting has done using some kind of technology. I'm not quite sure exactly. But rather we'll talk about him and his, but I'll just summarize that last bit, which is underlined. This lecture explores how poetry and humor have quietly accompanied medical practice, not as ornament, but as companions in survival, understanding, and communication. Okay, Narada, over to you now to introduce our learner friend.
Thank you, Mahendra. It's a real pleasure to join another meeting of the SLLS. And it's my pleasure today to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Chula Herath was educated in Royal College, Colombo, and is an alumnus of the Colombo Medical Faculty. He had his postgraduate training in nephrology at the Freeman Hospital and the Royal Victoria Infirmary, Newcastle upon Tyne, UK. He's been the consultant nephrologist at Sri Jawadanapur General Hospital for 30 years until his retirement in 2022. He continues to be in active clinical practice in the private sector still. He initiated the nephrology, dialysis and transplantation unit at the Sri Jawadanapur General Hospital and made it a postgraduate training center, which has trained more than 40 consultant nephrologists presently in Sri Lanka or overseas. He was the chairman of the specialty board for nephrology of the PJIM. He is an outstanding researcher with an H-index of 14 and over 1,200 citations. He has contributed to knowledge in nephrology and especially even to the etiology of chronic kidney disease of unknown origin in Sri Lanka. He has a keen interest in English literature, especially in Romantic era poetry. He's a keen bird watcher and a scuba diver. And he's an avid listener to both classical and pop, Sinhala, Western, and Hindi music. On a personal note, I have known Chula as a student in the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, since 1980. I remember him as a smart, well-dressed, and quiet student who rarely spoke unless spoken to. We share three aspects of our lives together. One is we had our secondary education at Royal College. Then we had our medical education at the Colombo Medical Faculty. And we did our postgraduate training at the Royal Victoria Infirmary. We are about 14 years apart in this, but I'm very happy that we share this with him. We have both delivered the Carlo Fonseca Memorial Oration, and it was there that I came to know of his love for poetry and humor, and I suggested to Mahendra and Ruan that he be invited to talk to the SLS. I will let the talk speak for itself, but cannot desist from reciting the last line of Chula's own introduction to the talk. It suggests that medicine lives not only in protocols and data, but also in metaphor, rhythm, silence, and the shared humanity between those who care and those who are cared for. Chula, it's over to you now, and I will join in the question and answer when that comes, right? Okay? All right.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that eloquent introduction. May I share my slide now? Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, ladies and gentlemen, may I thank the Sri Lanka Literary Society for inviting me to do this presentation. My medical faculty teacher, Professor Narada Surya, was responsible in arranging this with your society. And let me offer my grateful thanks to him as well. And my special thanks also go to Dr. Mahendra Gonsal Koral, who planned this event meticulously and advised me and offered much technical support for this presentation. This talk is based on a recent oration I gave in memory of Professor Carlo Fonseca, and there will be some references to my old teacher, which I feel is very appropriate. Sir Peter Medawar, the great biologist and Nobel laureate in medicine, who was a pioneer in transplant immunology, he started a lecture on science and literature with these words. I hope I shall not be thought ungracious if I say at the outset that nothing on earth would have induced me to attend the kind of lecture you may think I am about to give. Now, like Medawar, I have no intention of giving the presentation you may already have imagined. Only a record of how poetry and humor have accompanied one medical life. I remember Professor Carlo Fonseca quoting from Goethe's Faust, one of the great works in literature, at the beginning of our physiology lectures. And this is from Dr. Faust's soliloquy. I have studied philosophy, medicine, jurisprudence, and alas, even theology too, with ardent labor through and through, and here I stand with all my law, poor fool, no wiser than before. Now, Carlo began with Faust because that monologue is the confession of every true scholar. We may master subjects, but wisdom remains elusive. By starting here, he taught us that medicine must be carried with humility, that learning is a journey, not a possession. Between Medawar's skeptical modern scientist and Goethe's restless Renaissance scholar lies the intellectual space in which my own medical life has unfolded. And this presentation is not about becoming poets or comedians. It's about recognizing companions that quietly walked with many of us through wards, clinics, laboratories, and long nights of doubt. Now, most of us did not go looking for poetry. It found us. Or in my case, it ambushed me. Usually when medicine alone was insufficient, long before we became doctors, something else begins. A restlessness, a spark, a first faint line. And Pablo Neruda, the great Chilean poet and Nobel laureate, describes that moment better than anyone. Something started in my soul, fever of forgotten wings, and I made my own way, deciphering that fire and wrote the first faint line, faint without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open. That is how poetry begins for the poet, or in my case, the poetry connoisseur. But then life happens. Training, exams, ward rounds, research papers, and that early fire must find a place to live inside the discipline of medicine. Everything I want to say this evening falls loosely under three headings, not as arguments, but as lived observations. First, how poetry and humor help the physician not to become cleverer, but to remain human, to survive uncertainty, repetition, error, and the quiet weight of responsibility that no guideline ever quite captures. And second, how these same companions help our patients, not because we quote poems at the bedside, but because a doctor who has learned attentiveness, metaphor, and restraint speaks differently, listens differently, and knows when silence is the most honest response. And finally, how our scientific writing may benefit from a little lyricism, not to dilute the rigor of science, but to restore clarity. Some of the finest chapters of our lives were written in the lecture halls and hostel corridors of medical school. It was not just a time of books, cadavers, and endless exams, but also of whispered romances under trees, nights blurred with laughter and too much alcohol, hangovers that felt like clinical case studies, and stress dissolved in bottles we swore never to touch again. A vow that lasted only until the next exam was over, of course, and most of all, friendships forged in the fire of common struggle. It was humor and laughter which carried us through the darkest exams, and anybody who has attended the Block Night concerts will know medical students are very good at laughing at themselves and others. Somewhere in the late 1970s, when Vesak celebrations approached, we students from Bloemfontein planned a fantasy lecture series to celebrate Vesak. We imagined that our professors and lecturers are given medical themed topics from the Buddha Charita and made a list of possible topics that each one of them could give. For example, you know that Prince Siddhartha started walking soon after he was born, reciting the famous the Gatha, Aggo Hamismi Lokasa. So we thought Professor Carlo Fonseca will illuminate us with the topic of accelerated neuronal growth of precentral gyrus in Prince Siddhartha before his first walk. Then our Professor of Pharmacology, Professor Lionel, was given the simple topic of meditation and medication. And as you may remember, our public health professors often lectured on public toilets and concrete squatting plates. So our Professor of Public Health, Professor Veerasinghe, will talk on Gandhakilya Saha Vasikilya. Gandhakilya is the Sinhala term given to Gandhakuti, meaning a perfume chamber. That is actually Lord Buddha's bedroom. It does not mean a room that smells, like Vasikilya. Then you would have read about the mad elephant called Nalagiri who went around hurting people until he was tamed by Lord Buddha. So our professor of forensic medicine will talk on injuries caused by Nalagiri. The next topic is about the Venerable Mukhalantera, one of the chief disciples of Lord Buddha, who is always depicted with a blue-colored skin in Buddhist art. He's always painted blue. So Professor Dharmadasa, our medicine professor, will talk on Mukhalantera and peripheral cyanosis. Then Professor Priyani Soisa was not a Buddhist, so we thought we will give the next topic to Dr. Narada Vandasurya. And his topic, Dushkara Kriya and malnutrition. Who else better to talk of malnutrition? Then Professor Navaratna, our surgery prof, will talk on Angulimala's methods of amputation. You know of the serial killer Angulimala who went around killing people and collecting fingers to make a necklace until he also was tamed by Lord Buddha. Then there's a story about Queen Mahamaya, who was traveling home in a carriage and had to get off at Lumbini Gardens with labor pains and delivered Prince Siddhartha as an emergency. So our professor of obstetrics will talk of precipitate labor at Lumbini Saldivia. A bit irreverent, I know, but we had enormous fun making up this list, a small example of how laughter could cheer up your academic life. But it's unfortunate that none of our teachers knew about their topics. But at least one person knows now, Professor Naradwanu Surya, another one of our beloved teachers. Many medical students write poetry or humorous vignettes to get away from the daily humdrum routine of endless lectures and stressful exams. And this poem was written by a medico on first seeing Grey's Anatomy. For those outside medicine, Grey's Anatomy is not a TV show, but a book of 1,500 pages. The poem captures the alienation students feel when first facing this massive tome. I will not look at it again. There the heart-in section is a gas mask, its windows gone, its hoses severed. The spinal cord is a zipper, and the lower digestive tract has been squeezed from a tube like toothpaste. All my life, I had hoped someday to own at least myself, only to find I'm Flood's ligaments, the areola of Mama, and zonule of Zin. Ruffini's endings end in me, and a band of Gennari lies near the island of Rail. And my ampulla, wherever it is, belongs to a man named Water. I'm a geography greater than even I surmised, containing as do spaces and systems, promontories, and at least one reservoir. I will ask my wife to knot a jacket for this book and pretend it's a brick doorstop. I will not open Grey's Anatomy again. And that poem inspired me to write a satirical poem of my own, or I would say a satirical verse, looking at the multiple eponyms given to structures in the human body. I sometimes felt as if there are multiple personalities living inside of me. My body is called tenants of me. My body is a rented flat with occupants most strange, a jumbled patchwork tenancy. I am going through a change. The lease was signed in secret, the terms I didn't read, and now I host a cast of folks with every want and need. Inside my frame's democracy, I'm never quite alone. Each lobe and loop and ligament demands a name its own. Bowman built my capsules, Malpighi drew my maps, and Henley stretched my loops so long they rivaled yoga laps. Eustachy tuned my tubes to catch the sound of doubt, while Havers bored canals in bones to let the blood flow out. Pacini made my corpuscles to feel each gentle tap, and Ruffini took sensations that make my fingers snap. Brunner stirred my juices, Water piped them through. Oddy guards the exit, strict officious too. Hermekel left his pouch as souvenir in youth, while Fallopian hung his trumpet, quite a noisy proof. So when I get a palpitation or a twitch upon my brow, it isn't me, it's just the tenants having a row. They bicker in my alveoli, they squabble in my spleen, the noisiest shared housing that there's ever been. I'm just a walking case report, a ward round in disguise, a host of eponymic ghosts debating who's most wise. So when my heart goes thump and my cortex pleads insanity, I diagnose myself again, eponymic multiple personality. More than 40 years ago, when I first stepped into my medical internship, I moved into the interns' quarters in Colombo General Hospital into what used to be called the 329 quarters, above the radiology department. First time I entered the room, I discovered that one entire side of the room was like a Marxist art gallery. because towering from the plaster were the very stern faces of Leon Trotsky and Che Guevara, painted very realistically by the hand of a talented previous occupant of the room, who happened to be none other than my friend Saroj Jayasinha. I think he was the resident vandal of the hospital those days. No doubt Saroj had found artistic solace in decorating the room with such revolutionary fervor. But for me, waking each morning to the glare of those two gentlemen was not exactly relaxing. Instead of soothing me, the revolutionary star seemed to demand that I rise at once, seize the day, and perhaps overthrow something before lunch. I tried to laugh it off, but it's hard to sip your morning tea peacefully when Che is glaring at you as if you betrayed the revolution by oversleeping. So my stress levels increased ever so slightly, not from the patients or the workload, but from my roommates Trotsky and Che, keeping their vigil from the wall for one whole year. From the laughter of students, let me turn to how patients themselves use humor. As one dialysis patient said, 3 times a week I'm plugged in like a smartphone. At least I don't run out of battery. Humor helps patients cope with the repetitiveness and burden of treatment. J.B.S. Haldane was a British physiologist, geneticist, evolutionary biologist, mathematician, a founder of neo-Darwinism. He did much original work on genetics. He was a socialist, Marxist, atheist, and secular humanist. While working in India, he found that he has cancer of the rectum and he had to have surgery with a colostomy. The poem he wrote while recovering from surgery was a classic in humor and cheerfulness during very dark times. This is an excerpt from the poem. I wish I had the voice of Homer to sing of rectal carcinoma, which kills a lot more chaps in fact than were bumped off when Troy was sacked. Yet thanks to modern surgeon skills, it can be killed before it kills upon a scientific basis in 19 out of 20 cases. I noticed I was passing blood, only a few drops, not a flood. So pausing on my homeward way from Tallahassee to Bombay, I asked a doctor, now my friend, to peer into my hinder end to prove or to disprove the rumor that I had a malignant tumor. So I was wheeled into the theatre where holes are made to make me better. One set is in my perineum where I can feel but can't yet see them. Another made me like a kipper or female prey of Jack the Ripper. Through this incision, I don't doubt, the neoplasm was taken out, along with colon and lymph nodes where cancer cells might find abodes. A third, much smaller hole is meant to function as a ventral vent. So now I'm like two-faced Janus, the only god who sees his anus. Now the Roman god Janus is depicted with two heads, one facing forward and one backward. In fact, the month of January is named after him, as January looks forward to the next year and backward to the previous year. Comparing himself and his colostomy to Janus was priceless. Now I'm like two-faced Janus, the only god who sees his anus. Now medical humor is often accused of being callous, but sometimes it is opposite, a refusal to be terrorized. J.B.S. Haldane, a biologist who understood death intimately, I feel wrote one of the bravest poems in medical literature. Another patient who hated going to the dentist was Ogden Nash. This is how he described his misery. This is again an excerpt. One thing I like less than most things, is sitting in a dentist chair with my mouth wide open. That I will never have to do it again is a hope that I'm against hope hoping. Because some tortures are physical and some are mental, but the one that is both is dental. It's hard to be self-possessed with your jaw digging into your chest, so hard to retain your calm when your fingernails are making serious alterations in your lifeline or love line or some other important line in your palm. And then at last he says that will be all. And you totter to your feet and think, well, it's all over now. And after all, it was only this once. And he says, come back in 3 months. And this, O fate, is, I think, the most vicious circle thou ever sentest. That man has to go continually to the dentist to keep his teeth in good condition, when the chief reason he wants his teeth in good condition is so that he won't have to go to the dentist. In a more somber tone, not all illness poetry is humorous. Some are poignant and lyrical. Japanese Maple is one such poem written by Clive James after he learned he was dying of leukemia and emphysema. Looking from his bedroom window in Cambridge, he fixed his gaze on a maple tree his daughter had given him and set himself one last challenge: to live long enough to see its leaves turn red in autumn. It's a farewell poem, facing death with beauty, tenderness, and quiet acceptance. Your death near now is of an easy sort. So slow a fading out brings no real pain. Breath growing short is just uncomfortable. You feel the drain of energy, but thought and sight remain. Enhanced, in fact. When did you ever see so much sweet beauty as when fine rain falls at that small tree and saturates your garden walls? Ever more lavish as the dusk descends, this glistening illuminates the air. It never ends. Whenever the rain comes, it will be there, beyond my time, but now I take my share. My daughter's choice, the maple tree, is new. Come autumn, and its leaves will turn to flame. What I must do is to live to see that. That will end the game for me, though life continues all the same. A physician can use poetry or humor as a quiet medicine, sharing a verse or a light anecdote that touches the patient's own circumstance, and in doing so, lifting their spirit. Once I treated a patient in his 80s who was dying of cancer and renal failure. I showed this poem by Tennyson to him. It's called Ulysses. It's a monologue by the great classical Greek hero Ulysses from Iliad and Odyssey, who returned from the Trojan War facing many more adventures on the way home, and who has now grown old and does not want to remain in boredom of a mundane home life. He invites his friends to sail on one final voyage, on one final adventure. Come, my friends, it is not too late to seek a newer world, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Now, my patient kept this framed at his bedside, and his son told me that this gave him so much comfort that he wanted this to be kept beside his casket at his funeral. The central message of the poem is that even as the body grows old, the mind must remain evergreen, restless for adventure, unwilling to sink into a mundane life. And for those of us growing older, aging academics, I should say, there's comfort, even temptation, in hearing Ulysses say, it is not too late to seek a newer world. Of course, this is a dangerous poem for academics because it flatters our vanity. But if you read carefully, it's not about conquest. It's about restlessness, about refusing intellectual stagnation, even as the body slows. This famous and moving poem by Dylan Thomas was written for his dying father, and it asks him to defy death and rage against it as long as possible. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. It's not a peaceful farewell. It's a row of defiance. But then, that is how some people would like to leave. Rabindranath Tagore, on the other hand, encouraged on a more peaceful farewell. He saw life and death not as opposites, but as parts of a single continuum. And because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, in the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation. Influenced by the Upanishads, he often depicted death as a gateway to the unity with the eternal. The first line suggests that if one fully embraces and loves life, then death ceases to be terrifying. And because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well. So it becomes a natural transition. Incidentally, many people think that Bob Dylan was the first lyricist to have won the Nobel Prize, the first songwriter. A deserved Nobel Prize, I must say. But this man, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, was the first songwriter to win the prize in the early 20th century. So far, I've spoken about the physician and the patient, but there's a third territory we all know, one that belongs fully to neither. It's the territory of dying, where the roles blur, language falters, and observation becomes intimacy. Siegfried Sassoon was a soldier who survived the trenches of the First World War, a man who saw young bodies broken, pain returning, comfort offered, and death choosing anyway. He is known as one of the great war poets of the First World War. Now, if I wanted to explain death clinically, I would talk about hypoxia and hypotension and acidosis. If I wanted to explain what dying feels like, I would read this. This is a description of a young soldier dying of his wounds in the intensive care unit. This is an excerpt. It's called the deathbed. He drowsed and was aware of silence heaped round him, unshaken as the steadfast walls. Aqueous like floating rays of amber light, soaring and quivering in the wings of sleep. Silence and safety, and his mortal shore lipped by the inward, moonless waves of death. He stirred, shifting his body. Then the pain leapt like a prowling beast, and gripped and tore his groping dreams with grinding claws and fangs. But someone was beside him. Soon he lay shuddering, because that evil thing has passed. And death, who had stepped toward him, paused and stared. Light many lamps and gather round his bed. Lend him your eyes, warm blood, and will to live. Speak to him, rouse him, you may save him yet. He is young, he hated war. How should he die when cruel old campaigners win safe through? But death replied, I choose him. So he went, and there was silence in the summer night, silence and safety, and the veils of sleep. Then far away, the thudding of the guns. What he describes here is not heroism, not battle, but the physiology and morality of dying. So that is death as it often appears to us in hospitals, abrupt, undeserved, indifferent to our arguments. And it also describes the cruelty and the senselessness of war. While this young man has died, the war still goes on. But death does not always arrive like that. Pablo Neruda, who we came across previously, wrote about death not as an enemy, but as something that waits patiently while love is allowed to finish speaking. Listen to how different this sounds. This is not a denial of death, but it is a refusal to let death be the final voice. When I die, I want your hands on my eyes. I want the light and the weight of your beloved hands to pass their freshness over me one more time, to feel the smoothness that changed my destiny. I want you to live while I wait for you asleep. I want for your ears to go on hearing the wind, for you to smell the sea that we loved together, and for you to go on walk in the sand where we walked. I want for what I love to go on living, and as for you, I loved you and sang you above everything. For that, go on flowering, flowery one, so that you reach all that my love orders for you, so that my shadow passes through your hair, so that they know by this the reason for my song. For doctors themselves, losing a patient could be a harrowing experience. As his surgeon relates the story of the first death on his hands, I was still a kid interning at State. It was a young red-headed woman, looked like my sister. When the lines went flat, I fell apart, shook like a car with a broken axle. Went to the head surgeon, a fatherly man. Boy, he said, you got to fill a graveyard before you know this business. And you just did row one, plot one. Now this poem is stark, almost brutal, no rhyme, just the facts and the feelings. The intern falls apart because the patient reminds him of his own sister. That is the moment medicine becomes personal. And then comes a surgeon's lesson. You got to fill a graveyard before you know this business. It is terrible advice, yet it's also true. Every physician carries such a graveyard. Patients who taught us, often by their dying, what it means to practice medicine. And Professor Carlo Fonseca went through similar experiences in early career in the wards, and this article published in the BMJ in 1996, called To Err Was Fatal, describes 5 fatal errors he made leading to 5 deaths. With his stylish prose, he concluded that error-free patient care is the ideal standard, but in reality unattainable. Since knowledge grows mainly by error recognition, facing our errors squarely is the path to medical wisdom. These deaths would have been a strong influence that drove me subconsciously out of clinical medicine into a preclinical department like physiology, where in those days you killed only frogs. So elegant prose with a tinge of humor. Some of you may notice that the poems I have drawn on tonight are in English. Now, this is not a statement of preference or hierarchy, but a confession of formation. My literary education unfolded primarily in English. Sinhala poetry has a depth, musicality, and emotional intelligence that I admire deeply. But admiration is not the same as intimacy. I did not grow up living inside those poems, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. I resisted the temptation to include Sinhala poems merely as gestures, because poetry deserves more than tokenism. It deserves long companionship, and that is a journey I'm still on. So you may also ask, why English poems when most of our patients speak Sinhala or Tamil? How do these snippets of poetry and humor help non-English speakers, which are most of our patients? And of course, it would be ridiculous to quote Dylan Thomas, do not go gentle to a Sinhala or a Tamil villager. A doctor who has absorbed Tagore or Dylan Thomas or Tennyson carries in their mind a vocabulary of empathy. It softens us, teaches us cadence, attentiveness, humility. And when that enters our being, we translate into the language of our patients, not word for word, but heart for heart. We don't quote the English poem to the patient, but communicate its idea. A doctor who has internalized poetry speaks with more cadence, less mechanical delivery. So the poem shapes the doctor, and the doctor shapes the patient's experience. Now, Professor Carl Fonseca himself moved easily between English oratory and Sinhala song. He knew that the melody of sensibility mattered more than the vocabulary. Poetry is not only about vocabulary, it's about awakening humanity in the doctor and then transmitting that humanity in the patient's own tongue. The continuity was not the language, but the human spirit. And now, from Prof. Carlos' sharp honesty and clear prose to the exact opposite. The problem of scientific prose. Now we have all suffered through unreadable papers, pages of tortured sentences, abstractions piled on abstractions. Sometimes the title itself is longer than the conclusion. So when science is buried under lifeless language, it fails its purpose. The tragedy is that this is often how science hides its own beauty. And somebody says, science advances one grant at a time, but its soul is lost one unreadable sentence at a time. Famous biologist and author Richard Dawkins wrote, "There's no obvious reason why a scientific paper shouldn't be gripping and entertaining. During my spell as editor of the journal Animal Behavior, I tried to encourage authors to forsake not only the scientific passive, for example, a different approach will be taken by the present author, but also the traditional and dreary introduction, methods, results, discussion, convention in favor of telling a story." Now we talk of dry science writing full of jargon and lacking narrative engagement, but this was not always so. Look at the first paragraph of the Watson and Crick paper in the journal Nature about perhaps the most important finding on biology last century, the first correct description of the double helix. It was simply titled Molecular Structure of Nucleic Acids. We wish to suggest a structure for the salt of deoxyribose nucleic acid, and the structure has novel features which are of considerable biological interest. No dense methods or jargon, just a simple, lucid declaration. This paper is famously under 1,000 words, and of course they went on to win the Nobel Prize for this discovery. And look at this rather tongue-in-cheek phrase. It has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. A masterly understated revelation which would reverberate through future centuries. I think is probably one of the most important sentences in the paper. I doubt that that kind of sentence would pass the editor's pen today. For the beginning of this paper published in 1929, while working with Staphylococcus variants, a number of culture plates were set aside on the laboratory bench and examined from time to time. In the examinations, these plates were necessarily exposed to the air and they became contaminated with various microorganisms. It was noticed that around a large colony of contaminating mold, the Staphylococcus colonies became transparent and were obviously undergoing lysis. Of course, this is the original paper on discovery of penicillin by Alexander Fleming. He got into the crux of the matter right away. No beating around the bush. This is clear and concise with a conversational tone, very transparent about its serendipity, and a straightforward narrative. A large study from Karolinska Institute has shown that the readability of scientific texts had decreased over time. Readability formulas can estimate how difficult a text is to read. And using these reproducible readability formulas, they evaluated more than 700,000 abstracts published between 1881 and 2015 and found that readability is steadily decreasing. Another study from University of Colorado sought to determine whether the readability of medical research journal abstracts changed between 1960 and 2000s, and they concluded that medical journal abstracts have become more and more difficult to read. I understand that when science advances, it becomes so complex that only some abstruse jargon can explain things. But tragically, it has also taken the lyricism of science away. Fleming, Watson, and Crick reminds us that science needs not lose its poetry in order to be rigorous. Very often now, anyway, we have to go to non-scientific writings to truly realize the lyrical beauty of science. Now, this was a bestseller many years ago, a description of the Ebola epidemic. The hot zone has some of the best descriptions of how a person with Ebola dies. When a hot virus multiplied in a host, it can saturate the body with virus particles from the brain to the skin. During this process, the body is partly transformed to virus particles. In other words, the host is possessed by a life form that is attempting to convert the host into itself. The transformation is not entirely successful, and the end result is a great deal of liquefying flesh mixed with virus, a kind of biological accident. He appears to be holding himself rigid, as if any moment would rupture something inside him. His blood is clotting up, his bloodstream is throwing clots, and the clots are lodging everywhere. His liver, kidneys, lungs, hands, feet, and head are becoming jammed with blood clots. In effect, he is having a stroke throughout his whole body. Clots are accumulating in his intestinal muscles, cutting off the blood supply to his intestines. They are beginning to die, and the intestines are starting to relax and go slack. He doesn't seem to be fully aware of pain any longer, because the blood clots in his brain cutting off blood flow and causing small strokes. His personality is being wiped away by brain damage, and his liveliness and details of character seem to vanish. The higher functions of consciousness are winking out first, leaving the brainstem still alive and functioning. It could be said that the who of Charles Monet has died, while the what of Charles Monet continues to live. Terrifying description, true, but I feel this is as good a description as any in a science journal, and more riveting and gripping. And every sentence is scientifically true, its medical precision is chilling, and it's combined with a literary flair. Danish writer Karen Blixen, the author of Out of Africa, which was made into an Academy Award-winning movie with Meryl Streep as Karen Blixen, she wrote, "What is man, when you come to think upon him, but a minutely set ingenious machine designed to turn with infinite artfulness the red wine of Shiraz into urine." What a wonderful way of describing the function of kidneys by a non-scientist. It is science seen through poetry. Just like the poetic prose on natural history by Lauren Isley or Richard Dawkins, or the cosmic reveries of Carl Sagan, or the insightful wisdom of Jacob Bronowski, the author of Ascent of Man, or Peter Medawar, or the witty observations of Richard Feynman. I would like to add to this list the medical writers who mastered this art of poetry in prose: A.J. Cronin, Louis Thomas, Abraham Verghese, Oliver Sacks, Atul Gawande, and the late Paul Kalanithi. Of course, there were other classical writers who were also physicians like John Keats, Oliver Goldsmith, Anton Chekhov, Arthur Conan Doyle, Rabelais, Somerset Maugham, and William Carlos Williams, the American poet. Finally, I would like to end this in a more serious tone. One of the most profound and poetic statements by a scientist was one written by the astronomer and astrobiologist Carl Sagan. When I was a young man, I used to love his TV series called Cosmos. Now, let me give a little background about this photograph, widely known as the pale blue dot. The photograph was captured by Voyager 1, a spacecraft launched in 1977 with the initial purpose of studying the outer solar system. After fulfilling its primary mission, and as it ventured out of the solar system, Carl Sagan proposed that the spacecraft camera turn around and capture one last image of Earth. And in the photograph, Earth's apparent size is less than a pixel. It appears as a tiny dot against this vastness of space, among some bands of sunlight reflected by the camera. It was Sagan's commentary on this pale blue dot which attained fame, as it's one of the best expressions representing humanity's minuscule and ephemeral place in the cosmos, and also give us one of the best examples how the power of language can move and shape humanity. Many of you, I'm sure, have listened or seen this in text to this monologue of Sagan, but I never tire of reading this aloud. And I hope I can do justice to Carl Sagan when I read this. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone who you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we have ever known. Finally, I want to end this talk with a random jotting that I did on a lazy Sunday afternoon. It's still without a title. I wrote papers with cautious verbs, hid metaphors in parentheses, laughed in corridors where certainty strutted in white coats, poetry waited, not impressed, not in a hurry. If laughter kept me sane and poetry kept me human, medicine gave me a place to practice both. Imperfectly, gratefully, still learning. So thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. That's the end.
Thank you, Chula. If you could stop sharing now. That's it. Well, I'm sure all of you will agree that that was one hell of a presentation. It
Thank
certainly
you.
made us think a lot more about life and what it means and how narrowly focused we could be as a doctor, but you have to expand yourself to be a human being, part of community, part of the living earth, and then you see things much better. And poetry is a beautiful medium, which I'm very fond of too. Chula will be very happy to take questions. So let me put the gallery review so that I can see everybody. So either you could raise your hand with the hand gesture icon, or you can put your video on and just wave like that. I can see one person already. Mahesh, can you
Mahesh,
and ask your question, please?
Chula, thank you very much. I mean, I really, really enjoyed the presentation. I'm sorry I missed the original oration, Prof. Fonseca oration, but it was really, really touching. The question I wanted to ask was, did you have this interest always as a medical student, as a junior doctor, the days we knew you as a dashing young man, coming to medical school, or is it something that you have acquired afterwards in your retirement when you had a bit more time? So that's the first part of the question. Second part is, where is our younger generation, the current generation of doctors, in appreciating this side of life, this side of the human side of medicine, and trying to relate it not necessarily in English, whether in Sinhala or Tamil or whatever the language is, whether that side is being developed, and where are we in terms of the current generation? Thank you.
well, I like the phrase dashing young man. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Mahesh, for that question. No? Yeah, I had this interest since childhood because my father had a large library in both English and Sinhala, mostly English, and there were books of poetry. And I used to read books from childhood, and had the interest in poetry from a very young age. The first ones I read were probably those of Rabindranath Tagore. I remember reading Gitanjali when I was about 10 or 11. And I certainly had this when I was a medical student. And I surreptitiously read Tennyson on my on-call days in the wards. And I remember my house officers were asking, "My God, what the hell are you reading?" I can't. So, and you asked about the younger generations. I'm sad to say there are very few people who are interested in poetry these days. I'm sure there are some who sort of delve into music, and especially the classical side of music, as well as the mainly the mainly music. But I have I have seen a few people who actually like poetry, but not many as I would like.
Thank you.
I mean, what about your experience in your associations with other doctors?
It's difficult to say, Chula, because certainly English poetry has gone out, but that you can't. It's difficult to use that as a barometer to judge people's interest. But in terms of medical humanity, appreciating that there is something other than protocols and that kind of hard science-based approach. Last year, I was really, really impressed when I came to the Faculty of Medicine. They have started medical humanities as a formal stream, and some younger students, I think they were third or fourth year, they made some really, really amazing presentations, which were truly touching. I mean, it was not classical English poetry, but there was quite a bit of Sinhala poetry. So that side is being recognized and developed. But what I was wondering was, like in the 50s and 60s, there was this thing that English is too elitist, it's excluding lots of people, so therefore let's go to Swabhasha, and there was a lot of nationalistic rhetoric going on, Sinhala education, Tamil education, and all that. And then into that came, various, many of our professors who were also sort of promoting that. But I'm not sure whether that move has actually translated into people appreciating the poetry and so in our own languages. I don't know the answer to that question, but I keep wondering whether that shift actually helped or impeded that wider appreciation. I don't know the answer, but I just wonder all the time.
Because I think you are right in that that shift from English to Subhasha has made people not learn English, nor the Subhasha, at least the poetry. I mean, certainly Sinhala. I don't know much about Tamil. I'm sure Tamil poetry has a long history, and Sinhala poetry is quite. You can enjoy reading them, but I'm not as conversant in Sinhala poetry as I'm in English poetry. That is something which I'm actually working on.
Narada, have
And
you got any observations?
And I'm happy that the faculty, there's a Department of Medical Humanities, which actually gets together a lot of young people who are interested in the humanities on the not only art, poetry and art, and also the sociology and other aspects of humanities, philosophy, etc.
Narada, have you got any observations of your own?
Well, yeah, I feel that there is a greater interest in poetry, especially Sinhala poetry, uh, both in Colombo and Jawadanapura. Uh, I know that, from the comments I saw, I know that there is a doctor poet in the audience, Malini Appa. I saw her putting a comment about uh, the presentation today. So, Malini, actually, I have not kept a promise to Malini because uh, I was introduced to Malini by Padmini, and then Malini sent me her 2 books of poetry, and I said I will give a feedback to her, which I have not done, but I will do it in the future. But Malini, you could contribute. You are a
Malini,
poet.
why don't you show yourself and unmute and say something? We would like to see you. Just put your video on and unmute and just join. Don't feel shy. Okay, while we are waiting for her, one observation I'd like to make is that when we started medicine as medical students, it was very much a science, facts, how to do this, how to do that, learning. The human side, or if you like, I could break it to the material side and the spiritual side. We were obsessed with the material side. The spiritual side came later with experience and knowledge and so on. And I think that's part of maturing as a doctor, that just scientific facts are not enough, that we ought to know more about behavior, about emotions, about how people feel and how people tackle problems. All that comes into it. And then if you are fortunate enough to have some kind of background in poetry, you find that poetry does it almost better than anything else, apart from maybe songs. So that's my observation while waiting for Malini. Malini, are you there? No. Okay. Well, let me go to Jaika. Jaika, you have put a comment, but why don't you unmute yourself and show yourself and talk through the question that you ask. Jaika, please respond.
Hello, Chula.
Thank you,
you.
Jaika. You have asked a question.
Yeah.
Do you think tragedy could be better at healing both patients and
Yes, I
physicians?
just did think, but then again, then I thought that maybe some people can't handle tragedy because it may,
Yeah, I
cause
think,
depression.
yeah, I think, tragedy, it depends on the particular poem that you're thinking of. But I think comedy would be better and healing patients than tragic ones, which could make them more depressed. Like, for example, the poem that I read called The Japanese Maple. It makes you think, it makes you feel sad for that patient, but another patient may not find it as good as, as something more comic.
Yes, sometimes the tragedy can be uplifting and liberating, really. that you really accept what is happening. But that depends on the maturity of the individual, I suppose.
Yeah.
And their wisdom, how to handle it.
Yes.
Just a little tangential question on this. I was watching the mission back to the moon, the new what is called the space program, and I did think, isn't it good if they could send an astronaut to the moon who's a poet, an artist, rather than all these scientific people? Because I began to realize that we think of our senses, only the five senses, but in Buddhism it is stated, and it's now beginning to be recognized, that the mind itself is a instrument that you actually make observations with and really take measurements to some sort. And I read a little bit about war. The reason why they send artists to war is to record what is happening in war in the form of paintings and pictures is far better than taking photographs, because it gives a human dimension to what is happening, basically the whole tragedy of it. I don't think so.
I think there was one Apollo astronaut who was a painter. I can't remember his name.
Was it? Right.
Yeah, he has done some paintings. Was called, the paintings not only of what he saw, but also of imaginary worlds. I can't remember his name.
That's
But
interesting. Perhaps should look that up, because
had a present day with Elon Musk controlling the whole thing, it's very unlikely that poets will go to space.
Yeah, quite right. He probably might resent that. Yeah, quite right. Yeah, I must look that up in that case, because
yes,
some of the very what do you call heartwarming, somewhat tragic paintings are by war artists, really.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
Chula, I want to come in now. I mean, I must say I'm really happy to have listened to this second talk of yours. It's an expansion on the Carlo Fonseca thing. You've added quite a bit. I must say I was so so entranced with all your quotations. The spectrum, especially about experiencing death or tragedy by various patients. It was so fascinating. By the way, Malini Appa is with us now. She has put a comment in the uh, written comments thing. So Malini, there was a question whether poetry is becoming less relevant to the new generation compared to yours. As a poet yourself, what do you think? I think she doesn't want to.
Malini is very reticent to speak.
She's said enjoy.
I think interested mostly in Sinhala poetry. English is, they are not very conversant in English, but I see on Facebook prose and poetry in Sinhala, very rich. I enjoy reading those from various people they post on Facebook.
There was one of my senior registrars who was a nephrologist at I think Kurunagala and Anuradhapura, but now unfortunately has left to Australia. Who is a poet who published a book of poetry, Rajiva Dasanayak. I don't know whether you have come across his poetry.
I don't think
he
so.
writes in both Sinhala and English.
Rajiva. Okay.
Now, Malini, what about the response to your poetry? Do your colleagues read it, or any who have you got a feedback about your poetry?
They are partial now. They enjoy. They all give good comments because they are my friends. But poetry doesn't sell, and I publish through Godegate. People only buy these textbooks and things from Godegate. They don't sort of advertise or take the trouble to sell, but they publish for free, for which I'm very grateful. So I give free copies to people who I know would understand and enjoy, who like poetry. like-minded people I give as gifts. And
Okay.
so I did. Of course, my first book had, because it won this literary award, it ran into a second edition and it was popular. And the translation of Professor P.S. Seeley's short stories, that was also popular because it was like she used to talk about it to her friends and even her foreign colleagues. They bought copies. But generally, English poetry, I don't know, I haven't had very good response.
Okay. I must say I have read both your books and I will give you feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Is it available at Saraswati
Godage.
Bookshop?
No, it's available at Godage's.
Godage.
Dr. Chula, I will send, if you like, I like to send
Oh,
copies to
I
people.
would love to.
I will.
Love to see
If you
that.
would, yes, I'll get your address from Professor Narada and send the books to you.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you
I'm
very
sad
much.
that Sarath Kamini is not here. He is
Yes,
the other
he
poet,
has arrived.
the English poet amongst us.
Mm.
Chula, you have read Sarath's poetry, no?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Okay. They are in a
It's
lighter
one,
vein,
the
sort of.
one,
They are
the
in
one,
a lighter vein.
the one he wrote after his bypass surgery is,
Yeah. I mean, that's an
it's
absolute
nice.
classic. I have presented that. Yeah. He has written 2 books of poetry. Actually, there was someone who questioned me about people who write poetry in the audience. I think Mahesh, you'll remember him. Mahendra, who was the doctor who said that there are guys who have written whole books of poetry in Sinhala who are practicing in UK now. Is he here in the audience today?
Mahesh, I don't know.
Right. Okay.
No,
I forget his
no,
name.
doesn't. No, I don't know as well.
Yeah. Okay.
What have you
Anyway,
got to ask, Mahesh?
No, I was just going to make a comment about Tamil poetry. The Tamil poetry world is very, very, very rich, even in Sri Lanka. But unfortunately, the themes, the overriding themes, are dominated by the war and the destruction and the sacrifices and the suffering that was associated with war. So where that's going to take us, I don't know. Every time I hear those poetries, I fear, what direction this is taking society. But the Tamil poetry world is very live and very, very rich as well.
Chula,
Yeah.
I want to ask a general question, right? For this, you must imagine two heads looking at each other. One is the doctor, other now is a patient. Now, the doctor has a responsibility to do his best or her best for the patient. But in the process, through learning, experience, and practicing, can experience a lot of stress. And that could affect his mental health as well as the way he behaves to the patient. That's one. On the other side, there's a patient. The patient has a lot of expectations, sometimes unrealistic, sometimes realistic. And do you think that the interaction between the two is better for a doctor who has experience in the arts, i.e., poetry, literature, and so on, and humanities, as opposed to a doctor who is very, very scientific? He will tell you all about some trial and the percentage success and so on. But the doctor-patient interaction is a huge one, which is more than just curing. And do you think that without the support of the backing of arts in the person's life, the doctor's life, he can never really truly be a proper doctor? I know it's a very difficult question, but just like to know what you think.
No, I have no doubt that a doctor who has read literature and poetry and even who paints art would communicate with patients much better. Because as I showed in one slide, when I showed that poem by Tennyson called Ulysses, that 82-year-old man started reading it, and fortunately he was good in his English, and he was enthralled by it, and he got his son to immediately make a copy of it, and so we became more friends after that.
Right.
And we used to discuss about literature, movies, etc. For example, there's another patient of mine. When he comes in, when he came in, I told him that you look like George Bernard Shaw because he really looks like that. and and from there on, we discussed a lot of literature, not only English literature, but about Sinhala literature, about the books we read when we were young, Martin Wickramasinghe and W.S. Silva, and that kind of books. So it helps helps for you to become more friendly with the patient, and they become more trusting.
So we are broadly in agreement here.
Yeah,
I was so happy to see the faculty of humanities being established in Sri Lanka. I think that's a great one with Saroj.
No, not a faculty of humanities, Department of Medical.
Department.
Yeah, well, by the way, that is now Sarojan people have proposed that as a resolution to the WHO, and WHO has adopted it. And they're going to recommend inclusion of humanities in medical curricula the world over, especially in the Southeast Asia region. Now, that is happening already. I mean, by the way, you must be aware, Chula. Now, I think in 3 days' time, the College of Physicians is having a thing called Revival, which is a dinner with 2 talks, one on poetry and one on art. This is becoming very, yeah. Only thing
So
they have not said how much
who is going to get? Who is giving the talks on art?
Shanali, whom I know, she's a rheumatologist from UK who became handicapped due to vasculitis, and now she's just an artist. The other day she had a book launch at.
Are you allowed to give the name? I know her.
Shanali, of course, Shanali.
Yes.
Yeah, and she talks beautifully.
She has spoken at the SLLS too. She has given
So she's giving a talk, and then somebody else is talking about poetry before that. I can't remember, but it's advertised. Only thing is, you see, for me, they haven't put the most important thing, which is how much it will cost, right? Because it's at a hotel with dinner and all that and drinks, right? Okay. Lots of now, I think many organizations are following the example of Colombo and humanities. And I think I told you last time, the New York College of Physicians has a chapter for poetry. And then they have regular poetry readings. That is a long time ago, New York chapter of this. So I think I think the humanities definitely makes you a mellower man and a more tolerant person.
True.
Right.
So I know you have probably read more Sinhala poetry than me, I think.
Yeah.
Have you come across many poems with this kind of medical theme about death and suffering? I know most of I have read most poetry on love, people like
No, the answer is no, not on death and suffering. No, I haven't come across anything. I have come across, I think I quoted in my talk, P.B. Alvis Pera talking about a doctor who treated his diabetes and about the pain of the insulin injections and things like that, but not specifically on death or suffering, Chula. I haven't come across a Singhala's poem on that.
Mevan, you're next.
Mevan is the one who asked me.
Mevan, can you show yourself?
Now I remember. So Mevan, there are a large number of poets, by the way. In the Javadanpura faculty, the dean herself, then Vasantika, who is a ENT surgeon, and then Sugandhika, who is a biochemist. There are quite a few poets in our Javadanpura faculty.
Mevan, put your video on, please. That's better.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for Dr. Herath about this enlightening and enriching lecture, and I learned a lot. I'm so grateful. I probably will watch the video too, because there were so many things that I want to keep in mind as I'm also stepping into gradually the retirement years, although I saw you during your dashing years few times, as my friend Nirmalan mentioned. Anyway, I was first, I felt your initial note on, you used the word restlessness a couple of times, and poetry as a channel to divert that restlessness. And as you know, we all lived through 2 periods of youthful restlessness in the South. And my upbringing was more towards Sinhala literature, and not the opposite, Hindu Tilakavya or Sinhala Jadankavi. So I had an inclination towards the ringing tones of Sinhala literature, and during the youthful years, those restless years, I felt how that literature was utilized to even flame up those burning restlessness youth had. And you saw that, I mean, not in a negative way I'm saying, but that appealed to a lot of youth. And I think some of us can relate to that. Maybe the paintings of Professor Saroj in your background was another way of expressing that. But unfortunately, looking back as the years collected and cross overseas, and we now read this literature as adults with wisdom or some sense of wisdom in our heads, and we appreciate that, and we dismiss that restlessness of youth. And I sometimes lament that we couldn't channel it properly during those years, at least using art as a medium to tame those desires and passions for change that we all felt needed at some time in our lives, in our country, and so on. So putting that into perspective, and you touched upon some of the things, I'm not a poet, but I've been interested now during these years. Now that's all I seem to be reading, not writing. In Sinhala poetry, I must say, by far, the best expression of a patient came from a gentleman who we commemorate his death anniversary 50 years today, Mahengee. His book called Nomiemi, The Deathlessness, is an epic.
I've seen that.
Yeah, and that's an epic. It's a story of a patient in a satirical way. I believe he was admitted to Gampaha Hospital, what I understand, with one of his heart attacks, which he died of finally at the young age of 40 something. And he describes the story as a social parody, the deathlessness. And it was so touching, and I don't know how much I read in English today would replace that sentiment that he generates. Maybe that's what I resonate with. Obviously, his final epic called Prabuddha doesn't touch upon deathlessness, or death, but he touches upon that youthful restlessness. He says, I can't remember exact words, he used the word he addresses as an elderly man of wisdom, the poet. He addresses this youth and say, Victor, I used the word Victor. I was thinking of Victor Ivan, or whoever these 71 type of people. If I remember that, what he asks, his question is, how can I say? Let me rephrase it. Basically, how can you carry out a revolution in a setting like this, although you have burning desires? So I felt that kind of approach is necessary to calm down or tame the passion we had during that time. That would have been lovely, but I think the passions and flame was so great. What were your thoughts on that? I don't know. I made a comment on your statement.
No, just to add a footnote to that.
Yeah.
Mahengee came to Royal College to give us a lecture for our Sinhala Literary Society. And we enjoyed it. He went home, and then about a week later, he died of his heart attack. Actually, I went to his funeral, where because we were admirers of Mahengee, because mainly for his songs, mainly sung by Amaradeva. Even in the funeral, that Ma Malapasu Sohon Bime Dugiyak Lian Manavi, that was played. And then you get, all these things like what is that? Amaradeva's Amaradeva's other song, Vasante Mal Pokrunela, and right? Those were all they were very poetic and had a deep, rich underlying theme. About restlessness, yes, as you said, during that time, I think it's more than the poetry. It is actually the poetry which were converted to song, which made the youth either restless or maybe may become calm. Especially the songs of Nanda Malini, written by Sri Lanka. There was a spate of songs appeared in those days, which actually it coincided with the restless spirit of youth at that time.
Pavana,
Yes.
Pavana, Pavana.
On a footnote, I must say that as a third-year medical student, I was a member of Pavana. I, by a random event in life, not because I'm a musician, I was one of the 4 male voices that behind Pavana. And I look back today, it's 40 years. But obviously, the other day, sorry, since we're on this topic, I'm mentioning that after many years, I was driving through the mist in Wisconsin early in the morning, and my family was sleeping. So I just was thinking, and I suddenly played those songs in my head after many years of Pavana. And what I must say that the 2 songs I like, although it flamed up the blood of youth, the 2 songs I like are Lankan Literary Society, which I believe played a lot during Aragale times, but also the romantic song, Wahinnata Hakinam Gigundi, Really Gambim Walati Helin, Idennata Hakinam Batakvi, Batak Noidena Palakarahasin. That is I think it's more valuable to Professor Varnasurya. It's almost, I feel like a pediatrician. I want to be the boiling pot of rice. I want to be the smile of a child, that kind of a song. So those were songs that even I liked even as a medical student, but I agree that those songs also contributed to the restlessness of youth at that time. And I remember my colleagues who were, I was not a revolutionary by any means, but I was part of the choir, 7 or 8 people who took part in the concert.
My gosh.
Anyway, that was the footnote on a side.
Thank you, Mevan. Thank you very much for being so honest.
I mean, Mahendra, I
Yeah.
think people who have not listened to Pavana should listen to it. It's available on YouTube.
Right. Okay.
I mean, beautiful lyrics. You may not agree with all the ideas. I must say that I had to, on the wall of my office, or the building in the center was 2 lines from Pavana. අලුත් ලෝක් ගැන සිතීම දඬුවම් දෙන වරද නම් කිමට එරට අධිකරණය නීතිය සහ විනිසුරන්. I can remember it was painted across my window on that building. Right.
Nirmala, do you have something to say?
Yeah, just a comment on Mevan's question, whether poetry couldn't have been used to mellow down some of the emotions that ran through the youth of the 80s when we were students. I think that it's a contradictory in expectation, because those poetries and those songs were written in order to arouse passions, in order to make people more militant and confront injustice. So in that sense, I don't know whether when that tide was on the rise, it was almost impossible for somebody to write poetries about, how to calm the youth of the faculty at the time, or their counterparts in Jaffna. So I think the poetry was used very, very, very strongly to capture those emotions and get people moving in a particular direction. So.
Yeah, I agree with you.
If in Sri Lanka that would not may not have been that strong. That is, poets making the populace rise up. It has happened in other countries, especially South America, I think. right?
It happened in Jaffna, Chula, big time. There was a
Right.
poet called
Okay.
Kasi Anandan in the 70s. He's still living in India. I mean, his poems were absolute flame. It just captured the youth in
Right.
their heart, and it
Yes,
was
yes. I have heard of Kasanda.
yeah.
So whom were you referring to in South America, Chula?
Well, the one who was what's his name? I mean,
Not Neruda.
even
Neruda
Pablo,
is the one before, yeah.
no, even Neruda's poems actually caught the hearts of people in South America with because with Pinochet's regime, it was he obviously was anti-Pinochet, and there was this rumor that he was murdered also, Pablo Neruda, by Pinochet's people. But he was a leftist and a communist, and his poems actually did inflame the Chilean people. Yeah.
So I don't know how many are aware that Pablo Neruda has lived down 42nd Lane in Vallavatta.
I know.
Yes, I knew that. Knew that. Yeah.
I went to see his house actually.
Yeah.
And he has this infamous episode where he confessed that he
He
raped the cleaning woman.
He raped one of these the
Women.
Cleaning women.
toilet
Yes.
cleaners.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
And I know, that episode actually, I mean, he had written it many years ago, but maybe for about 40, 50 years ago about this episode. But recently with this walk uprising, Me Too movement, somebody has caught on to that.
Yeah.
And they, in Chile, they wanted to name the Santiago airport, the Pablo Neruda airport. All all these woke people got together and said, "Then no, we can't allow that." And it was
I saw that news item. Yeah,
but he's a fantastic poet. He's a fantastic poet.
Yeah, I actually wrote an essay on this. I haven't published it. It's to see whether one bad deed of an artist, should you cancel all his other artwork. It's called Ghost of a Genius. This particular about Pablo Neruda, whether this actually merits cancellation of his poetry and all the other good things that he had done.
Chula, that's a huge philosophical question. How a person should be judged.
Yes.
No,
I mean, I was wondering whether, this single episode, can you cancel all his other good work? I mean, for example, if you do that, probably the art galleries in the world will be half empty. Because if you take Picasso, he's treated women very badly.
Yeah.
Right? And so did Charles Dickens, for example.
Trump might get ideas from you.
Now, Chula, with your permission, I like to show you two poems I wrote, which were influenced by my interaction with the patient and as a doctor. They're not masterpieces, but I just like to show how poetry can come to you when you are faced with situations. So I'm going to share screen and show it to you, okay?
Yes,
don't
please.
expect a huge thing, but this is the one. Can you read now?
Yes.
I'll give you a background. This was a chap who was in my ward. Every Christmas, he used to come into the ward because he knew that he had lodging and food. And he knew how to come in. He used to come to casualty and say, I have this crushing pain here. Go to my left arm. This makes me sweat a bit, but I want to go home. Or doctor say, oh, no. With those symptoms, we can't let you go. You come in. Then he comes reluctantly in. He's always smiling, right? Always smiling. Very, very pleasant. And this is what I wrote. The man with nothing who had everything. This man in hospital for a test was the happiest man I ever met. Never without a smile on his face, never complained, just full of praise. Curiosity got me, I confess. What secret did he possess? What is the formula of this amazing fella? I just had to know how. I decided to ask him now. Your secret, sir, tell me, please. Thus he told me, completely at ease. I have no house, I have no money, I have no job, I have no wife, I have no children, I have no possessions, I have no anger, I have no fear, I have no hate, I have no worries, I am alone. I have time to think, I have time for nature, I have time to talk, I have time to care, I have nothing to lose. Death doesn't worry me, life doesn't worry me. I have peace of mind, I'm happy, I'm content. That is my secret. So
Great.
this chap, he really struck a chord in me when he said that. So I thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah.
That's
What's the
very
other one?
profound.
You really want? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Show me the other one.
right, I'll show you. Right. Right. Other one is this one. This is more humorous, right? I'll read it for you in case. Passing a motion. A man named Arthur Bowell, just a commoner from a hovel, worked hard for fame, and an MP he became. He caused a commotion when he passed a motion on the floor of the House, with pomp, poise, and noise. Quite controversial, I think. Did cause a mighty stink. When all turned up the nose, to calmly speak he arose. He pooh-poohed them all, defending his right to talk, with an oration of such delivery, now etched in the annals or annals.
Annals of history.
Superb, dude. I mean,
Yeah, very good.
There you
This,
are.
this. I mean, I think you should write more satirical poems like that. You know,
Yeah. Anyhow,
I wrote. I have written one called "In Praise of Schrodinger's Cat."
oh yes. You wrote that, did you?
Yeah, I because I was thinking of show. I mean, I have
Have you
read.
got it there to read it?
Huh?
Have-
I'll see whether
oh, you've been nice reading it. Yeah,
yes.
Schrodinger's cat. Oh my God, you can talk about it.
I hope.
At the moment, is it dead or alive? Or is it both?
Hmm?
Is it dead or alive or dead and alive?
Yeah. That you know about Schrodinger's cat, right?
Yeah.
And talking of Schrodinger's cat, Erwin Schrödinger is now known to have been a child molester.
Really?
Yes,
God.
he was responsible for rapes of many underage children.
Right.
And so what do you do for that kind of chap? Is all his physical theories that all the great physical theories that he propounded, are they moved too, right?
Well, I don't judge people by one episode or
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
because we are all
This
a mixture of personalities. And if somebody has done something in the past for which he genuinely regrets now and
yeah.
understand that it was wrong, then I don't think he should carry that scar for the rest of his life.
But the problem was Neruda.
Yeah.
He has just written, I wouldn't blame this woman for hating me. That's all. But there was no regret.
No regret. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole problem in Neruda's case.
Yeah. A person I would like regret to be that if I genuinely want to forgive somebody. If I think
Yeah.
that he has not changed, then I find it difficult. Although I know it's good for me to regret, to forgive somebody. I'll be difficult if I feel that he's not genuine and he's still a bastard,
This can I share this?
Yes, please. We'll stop at 3 o'clock, so there's plenty of time. Yeah.
It's called In Praise of Schrodinger's Cat.
Okay.
Hail to the cat. Now this I have compared Schrodinger's cat with various other cats in history and literature and the musical stage, of course.
Okay.
Hail to the cat, both living and dead. You can see this?
Yeah, yeah.
Hail to the cat, both living and dead, who curls in a box, both starved and well fed. Not Cleopatra's darling, nor Whittington's friend, but a whiskered conundrum with no clear end. You grin wider than Cheshire, who faded at will, but you fade in equations, still there, yet not still. Poe's black cat brought horror with one baleful eye, but your mystery is deeper. Do you live or die? Puss in Boots strutted boldly, boots polished and neat, while you pace on the threshold of quantum conceit. Grisabella mewed for a memory forlorn. Grisabella is the cat in the musical Cats, which was written by T.S. Eliot. You mew for equations that never were born. Garfield may lace with lasagna in hand, but you juggle two states scientists can't understand. Felix drew laughter with ink bottle tricks. You conjure existence from quantum mechanics. Macavity vanished from Eliot's pen, but you vanish in states unobserved, my men. Old Deuteronomy dozed on the Broadway stage. You nap in dimension that baffle the sage. While little Jerry outsmarts Tom with the plumb, your paradox hits physics laws like a bomb. Each cat leaves a mark in tale, play, or song, yet your fame in the textbooks will outlast them long. So here's to the cat with the box-bound fate, both myth and equation forever frustrate. Half phantom, half household, you always beguile. The Cheshire would envy your paradox smile. The Cheshire cat is the cat in Alice in Wonderland,
This is brilliant. Have you published it somewhere?
No, I haven't.
You should post it somewhere. Really good. I'll show you one more because
Yes.
I felt like showing you one more, which is
Yes.
My philosophical side, if you like. I wrote this after COVID, right? Wearing masks after COVID, not new. We always did. A cognitive mask for sure, a protective filter, secure, so that we could perceive only what we wish to see, and others seeing us could see only what we wish them to see.
That's good. No, those are really good. Have you collected? Do you have a collection?
Yeah, I do.
No,
Yeah.
I had some have jotted down various things, but the problem with me is an absolute lack of self-confidence. This
Yeah.
is the first time I have showed this to anybody but my wife.
Well, I can tell you as an independent observer that last poem you wrote was very good. Very good. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. So, but
Even that one on eponymic multiple personality.
Yeah.
I took about 2 months to write because I was looking for rhymes with that's what's called the rhymey-dimey stuff, right?
Yeah. I get help for rhyming through Google, There are so many sites which gives you a rhyme, synonyms, antonyms, all that. So they're really helpful. Yeah. Anyhow, time is really coming to an end, and I don't know whether there are any more questions from audience. Otherwise, I would now like to say, I'll just share screen again because this is the last bit we got into.
Mahendra, if I may say one word.
Yeah, of course, please.
Related to since we are on the subject of physicians and poetry, you probably know my batchmate Dr. Shyam Munasinghe, who lives in Colchester, England.
Oh yes.
He has published about 3 or 4 books already in single, obviously, poetry, and he himself was one of the early COVID patients. He was hospitalized. So since you wrote on the subject of COVID, these were his sentiments, just 4 lines, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
He was pretty serious with COVID in the early days. He wrote that බටයක හුලං නහයෙන් ඇද මුළු දවසේ වටපිට ලෙඩුන් මිය යන විට රිසිසේ මට බගේ බිරිඳ දරුවන් පමණයි මනසේ හෙට වෙන දෙයක් ගැන හිතුනෙම නෑ කිසිසේ. Anyway, there's a lot more, but that was Shyam's sentiments. But he came back and recovered, so he continues to write.
Thank you for sharing that, Mevan. Good to see you. Right. Okay, I'll get back to this then and prepare to finish now. So, okay. So this was right. Thank you again. Oh, sorry, I should go down further. Yeah. Thank you, Narada and Chula. So this is just completing our 136th meeting. We now have about 2 a month, sometime 1 a month, depending on the time of the day. But this was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm sure all of you enjoyed this. So this will be available as a YouTube presentation, but I will first send it to Chula to make sure that he's happy with what I have included it. And what we normally do is we give a round of applause to the speaker. So, okay, let's see who are brave enough to put their faces on. I see. Lots of people are coming. Very good. Thank you very much, Chula. Please keep in touch.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you all for attending. And let's keep this SLLS going.
Thank you very much.
Okay.